Okay, can you introduce yourself and tell us about why you guys are here today on this conference?
Sure.
I'm Jenny, and I presented Michael about the use of sexual infiltration in the animal and earth liberation movements, in specifically the United States, but building on examples in the UK.
Yeah, and my name is Michael, and Jenny and I have been developing this project together off and on for about 4 or 5 months now, through conversations and research, trying to figure out how these movements are being infiltrated and why these movements are being infiltrated.
For those people who don't know about the infiltration, could you give us some information about it?
Yeah.
Like what happened at England and stuff?
Yeah, so within the first 3 months of 2011, there was the exposure of 4 infiltrators into animal rights and anarchist movements. And 3 of these infiltrators, the 3 males involved in this infiltration, were shown to have had sexual relations with activists. 1 married an activist and had children with her, and 2 maintained long-term relationships with them. So we're exploring how the use of sexuality is being adopted by infiltrators into these movements, and how people are able to gain trust of activists by sleeping with them or using sexuality in ways like that.
Mm-hmm. What about the environmental one? They were both couples?
Yeah.
Can you give that little information about that?
Yeah, those were 2 domestic examples. One specifically was the Marie Mason case, and we were looking at the role Frank Ambrose played, her then husband and the co-parent of their 2 children, and the way that he gleaned information from her and used that when he filed for divorce the day that she was indicted, so that he could testify against her with their case for actions taken in Michigan in the 90s.
So in a movement like this, like what should we be aware of? Won't you think like some of the workshop you guys do will bring kind of paranoia in the movement as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a concern of ours that the examples that we're talking about will draw people to be inactive, but whereas we are exposing, and there have been exposed, a number of infiltrators in this movement, I don't think that necessarily provides a disincentive for people. We want to encourage people to A, be conscious that there are infiltrators within this movement, but B, to develop strategies in order to still be effective. And one of those ways, as an example, would be to provide greater transparency in what people are doing. That there are certain tactics that require clandestine maneuvers, but there are other tactics that do not. And organizing some campaigns in a clandestine style that do not need to be draw unnecessary criticism from the government. So that there are manners in which people can act and be transparent, and there are manners in which people act and need to be more secretive. So for instance, in the recent case of Walter Bond, a man who's been convicted now for 2 arsons of a sheepskin factory and a leather factory in Denver, the way he was caught was he hadn't talked to, I think, his brother in a long time, and called his brother and was like, guess what I've been doing, and sent him an internet link. So to make people conscious of the risks of these things, I think can encourage people to act in a smarter way.
Okay, let's say you're at a meeting or you're at a protest and stuff like that, and there's somebody like sketchy or somebody strange and stuff. How do you deal with a situation like that with the activists? Plus, you don't want to scare them away as well. If there's
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about a tongue-in-cheek way of saying, be in solidarity with one another, but be smart about what you do. Be aware of the laws that exist in this country that politically repress social actors. Be aware of the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. Know what the Patriot Act allows the U.S. government to come into your home to find out. We're not encouraging people to break the law, but we're encouraging people that they need to be aware of the laws that exist so that they don't break certain ones, or that if they do violate something, that they have proper protection. So if you're at a rally and somebody is sketchy, we're not saying that we should ostracize people or target people or make like an FBI's most wanted within the movement of who to look out for necessarily. But we are saying that people need to be conscious of what they're doing, who they're telling, how they're acting. And I think that that's one thing that a presentation we just heard pointed out, was this is about strategy, and this is about a larger movement trying to liberate animals from exploitation and human oppression. And if the arson is committed and you want to go brag about it and you are in prison, an incarcerated activist is not necessarily an effective activist,
Right.
and that we need to be conscious of our political system.
And we also want to discourage people from kind of like she said, the most wanted lists in the movement, in that oftentimes people who are older, people who are maybe not white, maybe people who dress a certain way, or more importantly don't dress a certain way, are pegged in the movement as people to be of concern. And I think one of the things our presentation hopes to show is that the FBI and the British MI5 is smart enough now, after having done this for a long time, to be aware of that as well. They're no longer sending 45-year-old stocky men with crew cuts into meetings full of, skinny, waifish people wearing all black. Like, they've adapted to that, and we can no longer judge who is an infiltrator and a non-infiltrator by looking at people, and having that model is outdated and silly. It's much more complicated than that, and it's as complicated as the person you're sleeping with being an infiltrator. It's not just the stocky guy with the radio in his pocket anymore.
How do we deal with people like who used to be the mainstream group will not work with local grassroots organization because they'll see them as like terrorists, or they're too violent, and they get labeled as wackos and stuff like that?
How do we encourage collectivity rather than grassroots?
Because all the labels, like terrorist label, animal rights people, wackos. How will we, should we worry about that? Should we clear that up, or?
I think we should always be weary of the language we use to dismiss other activists, and that we're not recreating the same systems the government's using to dismiss us. So to refer to another activist as, quote, wacko or extremist or even militaristic is adopting the language of the government itself, and that we need to be weary of how we create divides in a movement. And you need to have all kinds of social actors in one movement to really probably reach any radical form of change. And we need to be respectful of that. And just as much as I might not agree with the type of tactic adopted for somebody else, if their tactic is aligned with my strategy, then we need to be acting at least in some sense of a solidarity or an open dialogue with one another.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer.
Okay, last question. Speaking of solidarity, how could we reach out with other organizations as well, like environmental groups, human rights groups, and also like people of color groups and gay and lesbian groups and stuff?
Well, I think that one of the points which is being discussed more and more in the movement is the intersectionality of these things. Looking at the intersectionality of animal liberation with issues of racism or issues of classism, I think those are being developed, and I think that body of work is kind of bad as it sounds. First is developed in the academy, first is developed ideologically, and then is transmitted. I think we're past the point where that's being developed ideologically, and we can see the formations of more practical applications of that now. So a lot of the work that's being done for intersectionality, I think, I'm not saying there's not more work to be done, but a lot of that's being fleshed out, and it's really great, and that now we're seeing a lot of these cross-movement participations. I think we should encourage that. And
I think we have to be willing to get out in the streets and to help other movements. I think that it's great to have a rally for animal liberation. It's great to fight for that cause. But if we expect people to care about the things that we care about, then we need to start actively caring about other causes of oppression that go on in our country and in the world, and recognizing those connections. So it's important to have contact with one another, to physically interact and discuss the ways in which causes overlap. I don't have to do the same work that Michael does, but his recognition that my work is important, his willingness to listen to what I'm doing is important. And I think that type of a model is what's going to bring about more of a collective change.
And I think also groups standing in solidarity with one another is very important when you're supporting groups that are being isolated. So if you have a group like the ALF or the ELF, which is being isolated from the larger animal rights movement or the larger earth or environmental movement, it's important then to support those groups as they are being kind of ghettoized into these small factions. Good protesters, like Greenpeace and PETA, are being patted on the head, and more, quote, militant actors are being pushed aside. And I think to support that and to help break down those barriers is extremely important.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.